Help us keep the Product Porch lights on by giving at patreon.com/theproductporch. Please review the podcast on your favorite platform. Your reviews help new listeners discover us. Thanks. When you create more work for them, what do?
They yell at you?
Yeah. And when you give them a new process that they didn't want, what do they do with that process?
They don't do it?
That's correct. So they did both those things. They yelled at me and did not do the thing that I had for them.
Todd didn't get any Christmas cards that year from his coworkers because of that little situation.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Product Porch with Joe Golly, Todd Blaquier, and me, Ryan Cantwell. Our topic today is failure. What does it mean, and how do we learn from it? Now settle in, folks, because on the Product Porch, every topic is a product topic. All right, guys, I've been doing thinking. And when I do thinking, that's always a dangerous thing. So the thing I've been thinking about, like in one of our prior episodes, Joe, you said the words "fail fast," and I
accosted me. You accosted me on a podcast, as I recall.
So it's the word "fail" that's been resonating in my head, often in product management, because you hear there's a lot of talk about fail fast. We gotta fail to learn and like do these things. But I said, okay, but what does failure mean? I had to question myself. What does this mean? So I did the natural thing and I typed definition of failure into Google.
Oh man.
Yeah, right.
You do that before your wedding speeches too?
That's right. wedding speech, toast. Yeah. So I walked down that road and this is what I got. Failure is the absence of success.
Okay.
I said, okay, it doesn't tell me a lot, but what is success? Then I started thinking again. And it's I say success is the delivery of an expected result. If it's not delivered, it's a failure. If it is delivered, it's a success. Okay. I said, well, but that's very binary. I don't like that kind of black or white of it. I think there's kind of a sliding scale of failure. And I looked at I tried to put my thoughts into three groups of, okay, failure. If I were to say something is a failure, I want to know how severe was the failure? Like, what was the impact that or the result of that thing that didn't happen? What was the probability that something was going to go wrong? Like, if I walked up to a basketball court and said, I'm going to slam dunk, I mean, and if I actually succeeded and slam dunked, it would be a miracle where failure is incredibly likely. Or is it, can I write my name on a piece of paper? Like, oh, okay. So I'm looking at probabilities and I want to know, how do I measure that result? Because it's easy for somebody to point the finger and say that was a failure, but not exactly tell you why it was a failure. You got to know, how are you judging an expected result? So as I wrapped my head around these three areas of severity, probability, and defining a measure of success or failure, I tried to contextualize it to the product world. And that led me to what I'm calling the true definition of failure. And that is, nothing was learned in the end in the product community. So if a failure is that nothing was learned, that's a failure. And I'm interested in your reactions to that. What do you guys think about failure and how do you define it?
I think this is a great podcast episode. It's a 3-minute long podcast episode. You got it. We got the ending. We're good.
Talked about everything.
The sarcasm is just oozing out the computer screen right now. I actually, even like in the last 5 minutes, I realized I had like a little bit of an epiphany here, and I thought about something that really was a failure. One of the things that we pride ourselves as product leaders is having empathy. I was working in the business side of the company, and we were interfacing with IT, and my leader at the time just basically gave me the directive, like, you go tell them what to build. That's your job. But I had a really terrible working relationship with our IT counterparts. I chose to listen to my leader and not go back on all the knowledge I had gained as a product manager, which is to understand the person that's across from you, understand where they're coming from, ask questions, be inquisitive, be curious, fell flat on my face. I ruined a relationship with a whole department. And it felt crummy. It ruined me. To be honest with you, it ruined me for a good 6 months. Because I should have known better. I should have known better, right?
Joe, can you clarify to me, because I'm missing, what should you have known? What did you? I'm missing what you did.
I should have.
What you should have done.
What I should have done is, okay, acknowledge the feedback from my leader, but then try to understand where my IT counterparts were coming from. Instead, I just kind of like closed my ears and said, you need to go do what I'm telling you to do. It was a very one-way relationship. Knowing full well in product management, it's all about relationships. You are toast without strong relationships. I should have known better.
Joe, your description there in that story that you shared, and especially when you started, you said my brain first went to product launches and then you thought of other things. I realize there's kind of some categories of failure, which probably apply broadly to most fields. But in product management, I see some categories in failure. You've already defined a couple of them. One of them is the product itself, right? Like the product can be good, the product can be bad, feature can be good, feature can work, not work.
Yep.
Then there's process failures. You just do something the wrong way. And then there's people failures. We make mistakes with people.
Yep.
Am I missing any? Those are the categories that come to mind right away.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because I can categorize some of mine in those buckets. Like, and the ones that hurt, I think, the most are the people failures.
Oh, 1000%.
Ryan, do you have any of those that come to mind? Those kind of people failures?
Well, yeah, and I want to flip the script. I'm going to go backwards at this one. So, Joe, you're talking about I was pushing onto people. My failure, it wasn't about what I was doing to them. It's what I was allowing them to do to me. It was my failure. I was basically letting them define my job. When I say them, I mean sales and marketing and engineering. It was early in my product management career.
You became a waiter. You were a waiter.
Yeah. And it was like, I was eager and ambitious. I want to help. Like, I'm adding value and I'm going around. And it was my failure to set appropriate boundaries and define my role that resulted in a reckoning. Like, when I say a reckoning, like, it was big for me at the time, right? Like, I had to sit down in my annual performance review with my boss and basically have the conversation of like, look, you appear very busy, but you are not achieving results.
Whoa.
He said that to you?
Well, I'm being he was much kinder. This is like one of my first mentors.
That was the takeaway, though.
That was the takeaway. Like, you gotta calibrate.
Yeah.
we got to do some things here to get this ship like pointed in the right direction, because otherwise you're not gonna make the impact on the organization you want to make.
I'm betting right now there are other people making mistakes that they don't realize they're making.
Totally.
What I heard, Joe said I should have known better, but then he went out and read and learned something.
Yeah.
And that informed what he did next. Ryan, in your case, it didn't sound like you should have known better. You just didn't know. You were just doing the thing, and it was pointed out to you, this thing is wrong. I want to share another one. So I'm going to say, by the way, I don't think either of you failed. Based on Ryan's definition, you didn't know, you were made aware, and you learned. Learning happened.
Something. Yeah.
Let me tell you about my failure. Yeah. Let me tell you about my failure where I say I don't think it's the same as yours. So I worked on a team at the LA Times for a couple of years. And then, teams change. Or maybe I worked on that team for a year, so teams change. I worked with a woman for about 5 years. She was an engineer. I'm a product manager. We're on a train together. And we hadn't worked together for years on a team. But I decided to take the moment to just ask her some feedback. So I asked her, like, what could I do better? Where are my weaknesses? She pointed out, she said, I noticed that when times get stressful and when there's not a clear answer, you'll just grab the wheel and just drive it forward. Like, you'll just make the decision without consulting the rest of the team.
Oh.
And I realized she was right. What I was doing that was the mistake is that I was coming in to our sprint planning sessions, not thinking of it as, user stories, they say, as an invitation to a conversation. Rather than think of it as an invitation to a conversation, I was thinking of it as Todd dictates what we do.
Yeah.
I was under stress.
Yep.
I have to have the answers. Here's where we go. And to that point earlier, the reason I consider a failure, I never got to fix it with that team, right? Like, I never got to learn and then do it. Now I've applied those learnings to future teams, so maybe you guys can give me a pass, but that's why I consider that failure.
I was having lunch with a friend last year, and I actually brought this topic up to her, and she looked at me and she's like, Joe, you're going to have to learn to let that unresolved situation, you're going to have to let that go. That will be the failure. The failure on your part is letting it eat away at you. And she was encouraging me because I'd started at 280 Group product side at the time. She's like, you're fixing it.
Yeah.
She's like, you're making sure other people don't make the same mistake.
Yeah, and I've noticed similarities, right, across these things. And Todd, you were very proactive in asking for feedback. But if my definition of failure is that nothing was learned, sometimes we go forward not realizing there was a learning opportunity that happened.
True.
Yeah,
That's true.
It's until somebody points it out. Like,
Correct.
yeah.
It's correct. And it's interesting. I bet we could apply the same thoughts to both our product and our process failures, right?
Totally.
Where we see in product, it's usually the market who tells us we were wrong.
That's right. Yeah.
And someone points it out. You messed up.
And so I'm going to start where I started. Fail fast. Like, that's what got me thinking about this. And looking at the product bucket, that's where that statement is aimed, right?
Correct.
It's almost, I shouldn't say it's almost, it is more acceptable to put something into the world, and like you said, Todd, your market doesn't accept it, deemed failure. Oh, okay,
Correct.
you learned something. Great. Pat on the back, product manager. Do it again. Like, go experiment.
Yep.
Back to the people. Like, there isn't a fail fast. Like, okay, I'm going to try something new with Joe and Todd. Like how far can I push them before I piss them off? Like,
We're not usually running an experiment, right? Like,
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
have a hypothesis,
We're doing some discovery.
but there is something there, and maybe you need to finish your thought, but there is something there that I take from what you're saying, and that is on the receiving side.
yes.
If we act quickly, we can help someone identify that personal failure. And I think we could all be to blame for that at times, right? Where
Yep.
we don't want to say anything. I see it as kindness. I've now that I'm more mature in my career, when I see those growth opportunities with someone I'm working with, I'll usually pull them aside and just kind of point it out, just so that we can move forward.
Yep.
But to your point, Ryan, it's interesting enough. Fail fast when you talk about the people relationship is on the receiver side.
Right.
That's the only way it can be fast. You said it already. Someone has to point it out.
Right.
And if no one points it out, you don't fail fast. You could fail for a very long and painful way.
Yeah, you can be like Joe and you're still feeling it years and years and years later.
That's it. I am over it. I am over
That's good.
it.
I'm glad to hear.
I am over it because I know that, my students and the people I've worked and coached with are better off because of that experience. I tell them, hey, I'm here to make sure you don't make the same mistakes I make. And you know what it comes down to, the people side of it. we talk about, what are the skills we look for in a product manager? And I tell someone, I'm like, the most underrated skill? Vulnerability.
Why? Why do you say that?
Vulnerability, because it's like that, like being yourself, like being willing to say, I don't know. Right? Like sometimes like early in your career, at least early in my career, I felt like this pressure that I had to know everything.
Sure. Like that imposter syndrome, right?
Totally.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It's like, it's hard. It's difficult on the fail fast when it comes to relationships, because sometimes first impressions count, and people aren't as willing to adopt that. They aren't as willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like you only got one shot sometimes.
Yeah, and kind of looking at my 3 points from the top of when you're dealing with people, severity is high. Like you've got a high number.
Mm-hmm.
Probability something could go wrong. It kind of depends on the situation, like the context. And the ability to measure is really ill-defined, because
Right.
you're two parts, like, and you're not agreeing up front of like, okay, our interaction, how are we going to measure our interaction together?
Well, what's funny you say that. So learning from failure, right? We say it's not failure if you learn. Okay. So I'm gonna share an experience of how I learned from these interactions.
Yeah.
And it goes right to that point. It sounds silly. How are we going to measure this relationship?
Yeah.
But I worked with someone you guys know, Dean Peters. I can say his name. Early on, we worked as a product manager, product owner together. And from the beginning of our relationship, in that partnership, we sat down together and talked about, how does this work? What do you want out of this? What do you want out of your role? What are you trying to achieve? How can I enable you? Another one where I did that successfully is a new solution architect I worked with. His name was Dan. We sat down together. And to this day, I remember what he said. I asked him, I said, how can I best support you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how am I the best product manager for you?
Yep.
His response, keep business off my back. And I thought, done. I will create a barrier between you and business. I will serve that role. To that point, Ryan, that is a great way to mitigate failure in personal relationships. If you take the time, of course, we're talking about work relationships.
Right.
I'm not a therapist. I don't know what to do in your personal life. But as a product manager, if you want to be successful, sit down with your stakeholders, sit down with your partners, your team.
Yeah.
How is this going to work? What's good?
Yeah. It always blows my mind as I'm having conversations. Like, and it blows my mind for two reasons. One, how long it took me to figure out. And two, how simple it is. Like when I'm hearing people, it's like, do you hear yourself? How easy it is just to ask somebody, what's your expectation? How can I help you? Like just ask, like, what do you think's supposed to happen here? Like, can we align? Like, there's so much assumption, like left unsaid in any interaction. Like, some people are afraid, I don't want to be so blunt. Like, I don't want to offend somebody. But I find more often than not, people are more appreciative that you're opening the door than just letting it pass, right?
So you know what I do now when new relationships? The principle I follow, I mentally do a jobs to be done board in my head when I'm meeting with that person. And I'm focusing on the emotional and the social jobs to be done.
Hey, look at that.
Because I know, to Todd's point, right? Keep business off my back. That's help me feel safe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then sometimes that's the easiest part of it, right? We try to be overcomplicated. How detailed are my requirements, or how quickly am I getting a Jira user story in there, or how am I using Gherkin, given when then? 99% of the time, it's never that. It's, hey, can you do me a favor? When you talk to vendors, can you loop me in? Right? So I had JJ. I had a developer. His name was JJ. The nicest guy. He'd been at this company 20 years. And we had a vendor in, and we're like, JJ, we're going to build remote check deposit. He's like, really? That would have been great if I'd known that coming into this call, because I would have told you we needed to do X, Y, and Z, and we had all this tech debt. And
Right.
so he pulled me aside and he's like, hey, you made me look bad in front of our vendor.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's a great point. So I have a stakeholder chart that I maintain,
Mm-hmm.
and it has the names of everyone I work with. It's a beefy chart, and I do one-on-ones. And it's funny because you said, I do this mental jobs to be done. I don't frame it in jobs to be done, functional, emotional, social. I don't take the time to frame it that way. I do, however, write down their goals, and I always try to find the goals that are more emotional and social related.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, the head of marketing's goal is to increase referrals,
Right.
and blah 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 blah. Yes, definitely. But they have personal goals, right? They want to become the VP, and they're working. They want that title growth. They want to help me seem. They want to seem knowledgeable. They don't want to be embarrassed in a meeting.
Yep.
And understanding what matters to people is really helpful. So I actually keep a stakeholder list and try to manage frequency of interaction based on what is most helpful to our partnership. And with some people, that means we're meeting every week, and with others, it means once a month or even less frequently.
Yeah, those stakeholder charts can be very useful things. Like just putting some formality to those interactions to keep yourself honest as you do the job. Because as product managers, we are expected to interact with a whole lot of people. Todd, you said it's a beefy list, and
Mm-hmm.
it is for pretty much any product person, product manager, product owner, product leader, that you are working up, down, and across at almost every turn to make sure success is happening. So success now being the opposite of failure, right?
Before we go on to another category, and maybe you guys have more you want to talk about here or explore with people, I want to share one tip that I learned, and this is from Claire Hawley, now Claire Harris. She was someone I worked with at the LA Times. She was actually the VP of marketing. I met with her for some advice. She gave great advice. She said, instinctually, like emotionally, what we want to do when we're struggling with friction with someone in a relationship, someone at business, in our professional relationship, instinctually, we want to see them less often, talk to them less often, meet with them less. However, what you need to do is the opposite. You need more time together. You need to talk more and more time together. And I started doing that painfully at the beginning, painfully. But I've learned that that's the truth. And when I'm at my best, I still do that. When I'm at my worst, I still avoid. When I'm at my best, I will increase those touch points to make sure we find alignment.
I was wondering, like advice that you've gotten from mentors or leaders about perceived failures that you've gotten. Like this topic made me think of that advice. Our chief technology officer, his name was Tim. He was consoling me at one of my jobs because we had to delay a launch. And this was a big launch, right? 4 or 5 vendors, our dev team, we were up until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And for whatever reason, one of our vendors forgot to do load testing. The site basically stopped working after 500 concurrent users. We just didn't do load testing. I was devastated. And I'll never forget this. The next morning, he comes to my desk and he's like, hey, let's talk for a minute. And I thought he was going to rip. I thought he was going to just chew me out. And he looked at me and he goes, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm really sorry. He's like, don't apologize. He said, failure would have been the launch knowing that we didn't load test and then the site crashing. He's like, I want you to remember something, Joe. He's like, in a year, no one's going to remember the date you launched. They're not going to care.
That's right.
That you sent an email saying we're delayed.
Correct.
What they're going to remember is how you launched. How prepared were you when you launched? How prepared was the organization? He goes, you didn't fail. It's like, you got to remember that. And like, I still carry that. I every time I have an interaction with a new product manager, I tell them that. So I remind them of that, because I feel like that's like what I carry with me. So like when we talk about failure, it's the stuff around it that I carry with me, and not necessarily the actual event itself. You know what I mean?
I understand. And another takeaway I get from that story is that there's different things that impact failure, if we were going to continue to use that word. Sometimes those things are choices we make. Sometimes those things are out of our control, events that we didn't anticipate. But one thing I like about what you're saying is I think another thing that leads to failure often is the temptation to take shortcuts, or the temptation to do something that's incorrect, right? And this is a great segue into process failure. And I've had a number of those. This week, I had that temptation. We have this pilot. We're going to try out our product with a new market. It's a big deal for us. We got to get this thing. We want to get it out on time. And we're pushing hard. I had a temptation to avoid UAT.
Oh.
Because, man, it'd be so much simpler just to trust. And I do trust my engineering team. I do trust my QAs. And it'd be very simple to say, let's just roll it out. But no. I gotta ignore it for what you said, Joe, for what you said right there, because what matters more is what they're going to remember is how that product was received, what the quality of was when it got into their hands. And so usually the process failures I see, there's always those ignorance ones, there's always those special events, but a lot of times it's temptations I had to ignore good process.
Yeah, and I hear ringing in my head, like these shortcuts are the goal is so output focused.
Totally.
We know we need to be focused on the outcome, not the output of what we're doing. And it's hard. Like, it's really difficult for the kind of the human nature of it all to, like, there's the temptation, there's the I can hit the date, I can keep the ball rolling, but no, we have to force ourselves, challenge ourselves to be uncomfortable, and maybe take a path that is much more difficult to go down. Like, it's gonna make some people upset in the short term, but long term, we're gonna be way better for it.
Well, and to that point, operational readiness, I could spend hours just talking about that because of that very point, right? Like, how ready is the organization? Like, what is our acceptance? Like, having that discussion early, getting stakeholders aligned early. You know what I mean?
Correct. I'll share another process failure. I'll share a process failure of mine. We had an opportunity. And this, again, is the LA Times. A lot of failures. I failed, made so many mistakes there. It's a big old failure. But we had this great opportunity to really drive our video revenue up by creating stickiness and aligning videos to content that was across our platform. We had been using a third-party vendor, and they were fine. And there was an opportunity I could cut this vendor, save a bunch of money. I can't remember how much it was off the top of my head, but I just remember it being significant cost. That's actually when I came up with the idea, if you want to be wealthy, make a product that does a very niche thing for big businesses, and they might just miss how much money they're spending. You could probably make a few $1 million before anyone realizes you didn't do much. Anyway, so I identified this. I said, we could do this internally. There's a simpler way to do this. We can cut this cost. We can increase our revenue and cut costs at the same time. Fantastic. So we drove into solution right away. I went into the CMS. I found these tags we could add. All we got to do is, and I'm going to use these tags. I'm like, we already have those tags. We'll leverage those to create all of our recommendation system. Boom, piece of cake, right? Editors are already doing this. Writers, reporters are already doing this. So that's what we did. I learned immediately, the day we launched this, I learned that those tags aren't used the way I thought they were used. And actually, I created more work for the newsroom. And Joe, you've worked with the newsroom, so you know how it goes. When you create more work for them, what do?
They yell at you.
Yeah. And when you give them a new process that they didn't want, what do they do with that process?
They don't do it.
That's correct. So they did both those things. They yelled at me and did not do the thing that I had for them.
Todd didn't get any Christmas cards that year from his coworkers because of that little situation.
I didn't win any newsroom awards that year.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, obvious mistake, right? Like obvious mistake. I thought I understood the user flow. I assumed that I understood it and didn't validate and verify my own understanding. And I had been at the company for like 3 years at that point. So I assume I knew.
That maybe it isn't a failure. Maybe we're being too hard on ourselves. Maybe it is taking a step back and realizing where we are today because of that journey. You know, the journey wasn't a straight line. It had some curves. It had some divots. It had some was it landmines? Right, that's what landmine is, right? When you step on something, it blows up in your face.
And it blow up. Yep.
Maybe that's why we are where we are today.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious question with each of these stories, right? What did you learn?
Right.
Because to Ryan's point earlier, right? If I keep doing that, then I'm failing.
Correct.
But this is now why I'm very obsessive about understanding how the user flows work, whether it's existing products, new products, whatever we're doing. I want to know how the user intends to use something.
Yeah, it is your scars that make you, not the successes.
Put that on a bumper sticker. True.
Put it on a bumper sticker.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, it's very common. I mean, it's that goes back to that quote, right? I have found 10,000 ways it didn't work.
Right.
That's there's another Thomas Edison quote, and see if this one sticks with you. See what you take away from this. Another Thomas Edison quote. It's many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up.
Oh.
Now that's a hard one, right? Because we don't have the data for that. There's no like data that tracks like had we continued, something would have been successful. But as I ask that, if that resonates with you, I wonder if you have any application for that quote that you see in product management or in your careers.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the fact that you don't have the measure to know how close you were to success, but don't not do something again because it didn't go the way you expected it to go the first time. Like, you shouldn't just lay down, I guess. That's what I'm
how many times have you heard this? I've heard this a lot. How many times have you heard we tried doing OKRs, it didn't work?
Totally.
Yes.
We tried doing customer interviews. We didn't get anything out of them.
We didn't get anything. Exactly. That's the thing. And like, if you allow yourself into that pattern, it's almost like an excuse. So the learning shouldn't be, no, just don't do it again. No, it's how can we do it differently next time? Because there's got to be something there. We have to keep striving.
Right, we can't just give up.
It sounds very cliche. As I'm hearing I sound like a Hallmark card, like keep striving, like things like that. But it's we don't want to let ourselves take it from Thomas Edison of you never know how far away you are from success. Like you could be close. So if you lay down, it's like, now I'm going to throw another quote back at you.
Mm-hmm.
The Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
Then by Wayne Gretzky, by Michael Scott, like from The Office. Right?
Well, what's funny about that is from my career, I've seen that in action when it comes to discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So you said this before, Ryan, on our podcast, discovery is hard. Getting to customers is hard. It's hard. Mm-hmm. I have many times over in my career felt the temptation to just give up. Like just say good enough.
Yep.
I talked to one person. I'm never going to get the second or third conversation. Give up. And what's interesting is I'm going to use a current experience dealing with that right now. We have with one of our products, we have an experiment we're running on a specific feature where we have certain hypotheses that we're running against. To get the data we need for those hypotheses, it requires some meetings that we have to attend and some things that we have to see and people we have to speak with. And not getting it for months, for a couple months. And I like tiny acts of discovery, quick and fast. And this is not coming quick and fast. And we keep trying different angles. It's not working. Had I given up, today's Tuesday, had I given up yesterday? No, last Friday. Last Friday I said, I've had enough. We've tried this for 3 months. This data's never coming. I'm done. I wouldn't have had the 2 meetings I had this week that ended up getting me the data that I needed to make the decision.
There you go.
Like, I could have given up on Friday and we would have been done.
And I just want to throw it out there. This could send us down a rabbit hole, and I'm not interested in going down this rabbit hole on this episode. It's probably for another day. But I am terrified at the allure, speaking of shortcuts, at the allure of AI to become a proxy for learning from your customer and doing real discovery and experimentation.
That is a can of worms. That is a can of worms, Ryan Cantwell, but I can see it happening.
I think people already kind of think that, like, oh, I can just ask it and it'll tell me. But no, it doesn't work like that.
Well, I mean, Todd, we talk about Dean. He said to me the other day, he's like, remember, with AI, it gets you 50% of the way there. Directionally may show you where to go, but you got to get it to the other 50%.
That's right.
And it depends on what questions you're asking of it. You're all right, Ryan. I'm already starting to go down the rabbit hole. We should save that for another day.
We should say that for another day.
Just talk about it. It's a good question. But in this case,
shortcuts. This case,
it's shortcuts, right? It's avoiding the shortcuts, and we got to use true rigorous process.
That's it.
So last category we have is product failure. So in that category, I think of features and products that failed and the why behind those failures.
Oh man, I've got a few. I don't know which one's my favorite. So, as you guys know, I think most infamously, I was responsible for protective packaging solutions. So think of they're the little air pillows that you get in your shipping box at home, right? So everybody's got a package. They've seen the little plastic thing, and their kids love popping them. My kids still love popping them. So, by the way, maybe we can do an office pranks episode. Working at the company that makes those, we used to fill people's cubicles with air pillows when they'd go on vacation. Nice. It was awesome. Nice. So, anyways, I digress. But I was new as a product manager, and I wanted to make an impact. So I started talking to customers, and I was listening to what they wanted. And this was a time remember when the water bottles started to get really thin, like you couldn't set it down and top it over. I remember that. It's very thin. Everybody was saying we need to reduce plastic in the waste stream. You make a plastic solution, make it thinner. You know what my response was? Okay. So what did I do? I wrote a requirement to our development team, and we need a new product. We need to make it thin and strong. Like, it's got to protect just as well, and it's got to be 50% less material. So we made it really thin. So we go through the development spins, everything else. I won't bore you with those details, but I take it to market. My cool new product. I'm really excited about it. It does everything and more that I want it to do. And most of these shipping, imagine like an Amazon distribution facility. If you've never been inside one, they're big. There's miles of conveyor lines. There's boxes and packages and things flying around everywhere. And they're in the middle of the country. And when it's summertime, in the middle of the country, like Louisville, Kentucky, it's hot and humid. So the factories don't have air conditioning. They open all the bay doors. They have these helicopter blade fans, inside, moving air around, keeping workers cool. And each worker on the packaging line has a fan pointed directly at them. What do you guys think happens to a material that's lighter than air when there is nothing but air moving around a facility?
It became a party in that place. Party in that warehouse.
It was the worst kind of party you could imagine. It was just a mess. I mean, it was a mess. They couldn't control this material. So if you don't know, so these pillows, they are inflated. They are inflated right before they go in the box, right? So to save space, they're flat, and then they blow them up and they go right in the box. So flat, like it's like almost like cling wrap. Like think about that. And air's blowing right on it, and it's just miles of this stuff is blowing everywhere. It was a disaster. So I learned, like, this is my big takeaway, like the big things. I'm going to say failure results in learning. So maybe this wasn't a failure because I learned some very important lessons. Number one, don't ask, what do you want, and give it to him. I failed. What my failure was to understand the underlying job to be done of when they said, or the problem, when they said, I want thinner, it was really, I want to be perceived as environmentally friendly.
It's a different job.
Very.
It's a different job.
Yeah.
I also think that, some odd site observing might have helped you there.
That was learning number 2. I cannot simulate customer environments in-house. I have to get product in users' hands as quickly as possible to learn from them. We had a
similar one like that. I could tell this story in like 10 seconds, where we thought it was we thought we could create this mobile solution for a user, and then I found out the user is like in this basement where they can never get Wi-Fi. And I'm just like, as I went on site with them, I'm like, this is not gonna work.
Yeah.
How about you, Joe? Any major product failures?
So I worked in online travel, and so you guys know what dynamic packaging is? So dynamic packaging. So the way travel used to be sold, like when they bundle air and hotel, it was sold like pre-built. Like it was like there's a set of packages from certain origins to certain destinations. And then in the early 2000s, they built APIs, and they were doing like asynchronous calls to pull inventory and book travel with real inventory. So I was working with US Airways, now defunct US Airways, on their vacation product. And we were launching a dynamic packaging product, and they were the first one in our company to launch it. And I thought I was hot stuff. And I was more account manager, product analyst. So I was at the very beginning of like my product management journey. I did no discovery. I did no metrics, I did no benchmarking, right? Success was, because everyone was like, when are we going to launch? When are we going to launch? The president, when are we going to launch? When are we going to launch? When are we going to launch?
Yes.
And, it was a crummy product. We only had like 3 or 4 hotel chains on the product. And we launched, and I was like, I brought brownies and donuts, and the president of US Airways Vacations called me, and I'm like, Chris, it's working. She's like, Joe, it's 12 o'clock noon. At this point, we typically get 100 reservations by noon. We have 36. Ooh. Turn it off. Right? So I had failed on many levels as a product manager. I was allured by the on time, does it work? I didn't do any UAT. My UAT was, does it work? Not, does it help the customer achieve what they're trying to do? Yep. There are so many failures. Agile was just about to start being practiced. It was all the waterfall stuff, from a product management perspective. So like that whole product just encapsulated all the different product failures one could possibly imagine.
Well, you know what my takeaway there is, Joe, to your point, is when your product fails or a major feature fails, it's rarely a failure.
Oh, yeah.
It's rarely due to a failure. I mean, if you count up the lessons, there are going to be many.
Sure.
Yeah.
You'll have many lessons.
Yes. By the way, you just made me think of Wayne's World, like a gun rack. Let alone a gun.
You got me. A gun rack.
A gun rack.
I don't even own a
gun.
let alone enough to necessitate an entire gun rack. All right, I gotta watch Wayne's World again. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I know. I got to watch that again.
But yeah, mine's the same. I'm not going to go through as much detail, but when I launched the first Fire TV app for the LA Times, by the way, this thing was beautiful. It was gorgeous. In fact, I mean, this was over 10 years ago. And today I still see apps mimicking things that like we had done. Not that they saw ours and did it, but I mean, like it feels like the design caught up there. And it was because we had amazing designers on our team. But dude, I was targeting launch.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think I told marketing about the new app like 2 weeks before launch, a week before launch. It's like, oh, by the way, we're launching like this major new application. And they're like, here's the saddest part. My previous job before I got this product management job, the director of marketing, Todd.
Oh no.
How? Like of all things you would think I would forget, you would think marketing is definitely not going to be one of them.
Yeah. And this makes me think there's a through line of like a sense of urgency. Like we have to react. I have another quick, I'm going to not be as long winded about this one, but another one where there was a hot trend. This was COVID time, like COVID's happening. How can we like monetize like the needs that surround COVID? And it was a software startup that I got involved with. And it was just that urgency of like, we have to do something, instead of, okay, are we adding value? Is there a true need here? What does the market look like? Like, what's the analysis? Is there opportunity? It was just like that push of like, go do it. And it never went anywhere. Like it just kind of fell flat, unfortunately. Like, so don't follow the trend. Like, no, you
don't chase the competitor. Don't chase the trend that's out there. Yeah. That's a good one. I won't tell the stories. I have a number of those as well where our mistake, and I know Joe, you have one. I remember you telling me about one where the mistake was doing exactly what the competitor was doing.
Totally.
Just later, just bring it to market later, but the exact same thing, which is just a giant waste of money and time. Man, we could definitely do another episode on failure. I wanted to end before we do our takeaways, unless there's something else you guys want to add. I had 2 quotes here. I shared a couple of Thomas Edison quotes. I have 2 other failure quotes that I think I talk about 2 other aspects of failure that are worth just mentioning and getting a reaction to. One is from Mia Hamm, soccer player, Mia Hamm.
Yeah.
Failure happens all the time. It happens every day in practice. What makes you better is how you react to it.
Yep.
So that note of what's your reaction when you fail? I'll stop there. What were you going to say? You have a thought on that?
So the thought I have, like a misconception, and I think Mia Hamm is nailing it. Like the misconception is that failure is a signal of like incompetence or ineptitude. And it's that reaction. Because I believe it wholeheartedly that no person, business, team, or otherwise is perfect. Like there's no such thing as 100%. It's just how you respond to those learnings. I'm going to call them learnings. I'm not going to call them failures. How you respond to those things and incorporate that learning then into the next moment.
And don't dwell on it for years and years and years.
Joe.
On the next episode of Product Therapy, we're going to talk about...
So I just have to tell you this real quick. I was part of like a program at a previous job. I had a bottle of champagne that like was collecting dust. I made a custom label and I labeled it "Failure Champagne Tastes Extra Bitter." And it was like, we need to drink our failure champagne.
Oh my goodness. So here's the last one I have, last quote. And I think this is worth a mention. This is Michael Jordan. Surprise, surprise. I can accept failure. Everyone fails at something. But I can't accept not trying. Where I see this Michael Jordan quote have the strongest application to me is when people see new opportunities in their career, but it's a stretch. Totally. It's a new thing they could do, but it stretches them. And they're afraid of trying it. They're afraid of taking that risk.
Yep.
And so that to me is a lesson to learn. Like, think like Michael Jordan. When you see that job that seems like a stretch, or, hey, I have someone that wants to meet you, they're whatever, CPO at this company. They thought, I thought I'd make the introduction. Have the meeting, take the meeting.
Yeah.
Try, go for you. You want to work for a certain company, get out there and meet people at that company. You want to work in a certain title, put yourself up for that title. Go talk to people with that title and learn what you need to do to get that kind of a job.
That is, I could not, for many reasons, Todd, I can't begin to tell you. I think, especially in this job market, people need to hear that.
Absolutely.
Fear of failure.
Fear of failure. And trying here in this case, so we'll continue with the basketball metaphor. If Michael Jordan is trying, he's working dang hard at it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so at the same time, that means like, you want that job. I used to dream about this when I was riding the train, working as a junior product manager. I used to dream about the day when I ran a product organization. I pictured in my head bringing and instituting practices and hiring the people and training them, mentoring them. And I pictured in my head. And that's the thing, is like, you have that dream, you're picturing it in your head, that thing you want to do. And I want to be a product manager, and I want to run, I want to work at this company, or I want to have this kind of technology. I want to be an AI product manager. Great. Go work at it. Like, go for it. Like, trying means learn everything you need to learn. Talk to everyone you need to talk to learn how to become that person.
Amen, brother.
So I would love to hear from our listeners, like what some of their failures are, whether it's a spectacular failure or it's a minor one, or it's product, process, or people. Let us know. Email us at admin@theproductporch.com and let us know your stories. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, me too.
Make that a third.
Me too.
All right. Are we ready for takeaways?
We are. Don't let your failures dictate your future.
I think mine is, Todd, make yourself aware of the things that you aren't aware of. I think getting that feedback, that something you said about one of your experiences, because if you're not learning, you are failing. Therefore, you need to go learn, like, where those blind spots are.
I love that. My takeaway is failure is rarely due to one thing. It's rarely due to, I said this one thing wrong, or I forgot this one step of the process, or, I made this one mistake. If you really want to learn, you have to be very thoughtful about investigating the whys behind failure.
Exactly.
This was fun and therapeutic.
It was.
Very therapeutic.
Yeah.
Who knew talking about our failures would make us feel better?
Who knew we'd be bringing in Wayne's World, a Wayne's World reference.
We went a long time without mentioning it. Thank you for joining us on the Product Porch. We release new episodes every 2 weeks. You can also find us on LinkedIn for more content. We offer a special thank you to AJ and Jack Walker for the music. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts of this podcast are their own and do not represent nor necessarily reflect those of their employer.